Good morning. What we're going to talk about today is the basic difference between a static mesh and a skeletal mesh. Now that you know how to create a level, and you know how to drag and drop the basic elements that are in here, whether they be a cube or a sphere or a player start, into a scene to make them work. And we're going to be talking about importing now assets, and we're going to be talking about bringing an import is to bring in a model or a mesh that has animation on it. And a basic non-moving mesh, something that you've created in a 3D program or gotten from a 3D program like 3ds Max or Maya or Blender or another 3D program like that, that is non-animated, that is called a static mesh. Any mesh that you bring in that contains an animation sequence, whether that be a character who walks or, in the case of what we're going to work with today, a gear that just spins in space. It has to be made in a 3D program a little bit differently. It has to contain a bone structure, and it has to contain an animated sequence. And when we import those into Unreal, they are called a skeletal mesh. So static mesh doesn't move, it is static. A skeletal mesh is any mesh that contains an animated sequence and bones. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to show you, I have two of them that are all set up and ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to import a static mesh, and I'm going to show you how that works. I think I've talked about it once before, but I want to go through it again. And then I'm going to show you how to import a skeletal mesh. Now this class is not about 3D modeling. So I'm not going to go back and show you how to create an object in a 3D modeling program that contains an animation. If you would like to take that class, I have an animation class that talks about 3D modeling, which is, I think, CIS 130DA is the modeling aspect of 3D, modeling and texturing, and then 130DB is the animation part of that course. So if you'd like to take those classes, by all means, sign up for them. If not, you'll kind of have to work with whatever you can find out there on the web or for what people give you. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create some new folders down here in my content folder. Now I have a blank world. I just named it static versus skeletal, using underscores for spaces between the words. I used a blank world with the starter content, so I have some textures to apply to things and bring them in. What I'm going to do is, in terms of keeping your things organized, I almost always create my own folders for my own stuff. So rather than go into the starter content, which contains a mesh folder, I think it's got textures, shapes, props, particles, materials, maps, HDR blueprints, audio, rather than put it in here and get confused if I ever have to go back and find something I've done before. What I do is I create my own folder. So what I do is I right-click in this empty space, and I go up here to New Folder, and I'm just going to type in Static Mesh. No spaces again, just Static Mesh, so I know that that's what that's going to be. And then I'm going to create a new one. I'm going to call that one Skeletal Mesh, so I can keep these things separate from each other. So I've got two folders, Static Mesh and Skeletal Mesh. So inside my Static Mesh folder, what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to go here to where it says Import to Game Static Mesh. It's telling me exactly where it's going to put that folder, or where the objects. All right. So then I'm going to go and I'm going to track down the element that I need to have, which is going to be, I think I've got it in Course Outline, and then Working with Assets, and I have got Export, and the one I'm looking for in here is called Wooden Crate. All right, now it is an .fbx file, which is a universal exportation format that goes out of virtually every major modeling program now. FBX is the standard in the industry. It contains, if you need bones and all the other animations can be built in. There are a lot of things that you can do with that particular format. And it's cross-platform, so it'll work on a Mac, it'll work on a PC, it'll work in any of those programs. I can import this file into Maya, I can import it into Max, I can import it into Blender, I can import it into any 3D program, Cinema 4D or Lightwave or any of those. So I'm just going to open that up. All right, now that particular crate contains some things that we need to know about. So when this window pops up, it says FBX import options. Now remember, this is a static mesh. So where it says import as skeletal, it already knows that that file does not contain any bones. When you export out of a 3D program, the information that's coded into it would be that there are bones or there aren't bones in there. And when you go to import a mesh into Unreal, it automatically knows whether or not it is skeletal or not. Now, when we talk about the animated meshes here in a second, you'll see that that's not always what you want to do anyway. Don't assume that you always check that box if you're doing something for an animated sequence. But right now it knows that it's not that. The second thing down here is import materials and import textures. Now, because that file is sitting in a folder, that FBX file, in a folder with its textures that I used in a 3D program, they're all in the same place, which is what I have you do. Download all of the things and keep them in the same folder. When I go to import it, it will automatically create import the textures and automatically create the materials necessary to go on that model. Now you can see it's imported them in here. It takes a few seconds for them to read, but I've got two of these material slots right here. I've got the two base textures. There's two different types of wood. Each one is turned into its own material. It's automatically named. And if I double click on this static mesh right here, you can see it's already got the textures applied to it. And the textures are over here in the right-hand side. We'll talk more about this in another video, the things that you're seeing in here. But basically, that is a static mesh. It doesn't do anything. It just sits there. This is your mesh window where you can see everything you need to know about it. And when we talk about collision boxes, we'll come back into this one. We'll talk more about some of these elements that are up here and things that are going on down the side. So that's that. It's imported everything automatically. Now you'll notice these little stars on the bottom left-hand corner of things. Whenever you see those, that is indicating to you that that is an unsaved object. So if the program were to crash right now, or if I were to close it and not save anything, these would not be in there. So what you always want to do, and get in the habit of doing this, normally we're used to Control S. But Control S doesn't work the same in this program. What Control S will do is Control S, the save, will save this window, but it won't save any content that you've imported. You have to physically go up to File, go down to Save All, and that says Control S, but again, don't fall for it. That doesn't necessarily mean that. Click that, and then everything is saved. Once that asterisk goes away, you're set. And then what I can do is I can click on that box, and I can drag it out here, and I can set it right there. And I've got an asset, a static mesh asset in my scene. Now, to go back up to this, I'm just going to come up here to this little window, and I'm going to click the button that says Content, and it'll take me back to there. And I'm going to open up now Skeletal Mesh. And I'm going to right-click. I'm going to do the exact same thing. Import to game Skeletal Mesh this time. And I have a different file out there. That is called gearturn.fbx. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select that. Now, this particular object, which has a bone in it, is an animated sequence, is recognized automatically as skeletal. So it does that. Now, you'll also see down here, because it recognizes that it has bones and animation, it's going to do a couple of things down here. Now, normally what happens is when you bring in something that has a skeleton, whether it be a single bone or an entire animated figure, this becomes important. In this particular case, it's not. It has a bone inside. I really don't need to worry about anything else on that right now. We're going to talk about skeletal meshes and dealing with characters in another video. But for right now, we're going to leave this as none. It just means that it's going to do something a little bit different, and I'll explain what that is. Import materials. There are no materials for this one. It's just a model that I made. All right, and I'm not going to do anything else to it at this point. I'm just going to leave it the way it is, and then click Import All. Now, when I double-click on this and open it up, you'll notice that it says Gear Turn Skeleton. That's right there. But it's not actually turning. If I do, it comes in with two other files. Gear Turn Physical Asset. Okay, Physical Asset is the part of the skeletal mesh that controls the physics on this one. So if I were to come up here and let's see if I can do the simulation, it'll do it for me. No, it's not really doing anything. But normally what happens is, like in a character, it's like taking a live character, like a marionette, and cutting the strings, and it just drops down flat. Okay, this is the actual skeleton window that shows things like the active sockets, all of the bones. The bones are all showing up in there, and everything is all set. You can see that there is a bone 02. It's an object that is deep down inside of that thing, which is not even visible. If I well, I can't deselect it now, but yes, I can. If I deselect it, it goes away. If I click on it, it comes back. Bones, when they're exported out of a 3D program, are not visible. That's why their bones are a special type of object that don't show up when they come in here. And I'll close that down. Okay, I'm going to go back up here to import, and I'm going to go back to that gear turn. Yep. And what I'll think I'll do here is see if I can't... let me stop here for just a second. Okay, we're back. I missed a checkbox that I should have checked on there. So I've gone back and I've removed those elements, and I'm going to bring them back in again and show you this thing again. What happens is this window gets closed up, and you got to train yourself to make sure whenever you see these little triangles, you open things up. All right, there might be things underneath there that you need to have control over. Now, in this particular case, it was import as skeletal, it was import mesh. I didn't want the materials down here. When I click this little button, it opens up another section down here. And what I want to make sure that I check is the button that says import animations. If I don't check that, it brings it in essence, as the model without any animations on. So I'm going to go ahead and click import all now, and I get a fourth element right here. Remember a second ago I got the gear, I got these two different skeletal models. Now I have one called gear turn animation, and when I double click on it, this is what you see. It is an animated sequence. This is what was exported out of the 3D program, the model moving like that. And then what I can do is I can then drag this object and put it out into the world, and I'm going to raise it up a little bit, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to scale it up. And again, as a reminder, the way that I do this is you hold down, you hit the space bar to cycle through them, and then you can get to the scale tool, and if you grab it right in the middle, it'll scale it up uniformly as opposed to dragging it and extending it, its width or its length or its height. So I'll get that. Now when I go in and play, there's what we've got. So I have that gear is now in the scene, and it is an animated sequence. So that is a skeletal mesh as opposed to a static mesh. So static mesh kind of tells you everything you need to know, as does skeletal. If it's static, it's not moving. If it's skeletal, it contains bones, it contains an animated sequence, and can be brought in. Now this is a far cry. Even though you are seeing two skeletal icons down there in the content browser, this is a far cry from an animated character. All animated characters are going to have what's called a skeletal file and a physics asset file. That comes with everything. Now, whether or not you use them, in this particular case, I don't need them. I don't want that gear to drop out of the sky as soon as I go in and play and act like somebody has cut the strings holding it up. This is an animated sequence that rises and turns and then lowers. And that's what I wanted to do. So I really don't want a physics asset on that one. And I could theoretically go back and just right-click and delete it, and it's not going to harm anything because it's not being used. The gear turn skeleton, however, that file has to remain. That contains the bone information that I need to have to make this thing run. So that's a simple explanation of the difference between a static mesh and how to import a static mesh, and a skeletal mesh and importing it with its additional files. Don't forget to check to make sure that you are also importing the animation. Otherwise, you end up with a static copy of what you were trying to bring in. Right? Thanks.